Members of council, if you can please take your seats. This meeting is now resumed. Members of council, good morning. Okay, Councillor McMahon, I understand you wish to make a brief announcement at this time.
I do, thank you. Good morning, Speaker. Good morning, colleagues. The City of Toronto has partnered with Ms. Beek to establish an internship program for Aboriginal youth in the councillors' offices. This is part of the city's Aboriginal employment strategy. Ms. Beek, Aboriginal Employment and Training, provides Greater Toronto Area's Aboriginal community with training initiatives and employment services. They found the candidates, and it's providing the funding for this initiative. Through their work in the councillors' offices, the Aboriginal youth will gain. Sorry.
Oh.
Someone's mic's on.
Councillor Burnside.
Councillor Burnside, your mic's on while I'm speaking, which is surprising. Through their work in councillors' offices, the Aboriginal youth will gain city work experience, job-relevant skills, a professional network, and exposure to the Toronto Public Service and to the community work that councillors are involved in, and developing important skills for future employment. The program consists of 4 6-month internships, which will end October 2017. I would like to introduce the participants. Jordan Salado. I'm not sure if Jordan's here. Oh, Jordan, do you want to stand? Working in the office of Councillor Shelley Carroll. There we go.
We want Jordan.
Jolene Casper, working in the office of Councillor Mary Fragadakis. And Alexis Linkert, working in the office of Councillor Mike Layton. And Craig Waboose, working in my office and was a victim of a hit and run, which was not a good way to welcome him to Toronto, but we will help with Vision Zero to help that. But there they are. Can we give them a round of applause? Let's turn them on politics instead of off politics.
Thank you. Members of council, we will now review and confirm the order paper. To this point, council has completed 170 items. There are 68 items left on the agenda, plus 49 member motions. City Council has decided to consider the following items together as the first items of business today. AU 9.12 on Auditor General's observations of a land acquisition at Finch Avenue West and Arrow Road by the Toronto Parking Authority, Part 2, and CA 17.2 on the appointment of public members to the Toronto Parking Authority Board. City Council will consider member motions at 2 p.m. I will now take the release of holds. Please put your name on the request to question staff. Councillor Holliday.
Good morning, Madam Speaker. I'm sorry, I don't know what page it's on yet, but it's EX 26.4, page 3, implementing a vacant home tax in Toronto. I did an advanced circulation of a motion, which I hope everyone is okay with, and I'd love to quickly release this item.
Do you want to put it on the screen, please? This is on page 3, EX 26.4, vacant home tax. There it is on the screen. It was circulated yesterday.
Thanks, Joe.
All right. It was circulated yesterday. On favor? Carried. Item is amended. On favor? Recorded vote.
Councillor Layton, please. Councillor DeGiorgio, when you're seated, please.
The item is amended, carries unanimously, 32 in favor.
Thank you. Councillor Doucette.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Good morning, everyone. On page 9, CC 31.3, the Ombudsman Toronto report, the investigation of city process on handling development charge complaints. I have my questions answered, and I will release that one.
Okay, so on page 9, CC 31.3, Councillor Doucette is releasing. All in favor? Carried. Councillor Cressy.
Thank you, Speaker. On page 8, TE 25.6, 25 Leonard Avenue, Official Plan Amendment and Zoning, I have a motion, if it can be put on screen, which I believe is quick. This is an affordable housing project of 22 units, and the motion simply reads to direct staff to work with the applicant on their site plan over the summer process, over the summer months, excuse me.
On page 8, T 25.6, Councillor Cressy has an amendment. All in favor? Carried. Item is amended. All in favor? Carried. Thank you.
And I have a second.
Okay.
On page 5, this is CD 21.13, update on city-supported community-led violence prevention and intervention. If council would indulge me in 10 seconds, I could release this quickly. So just 10 seconds. On June 30th last year, the province joined the mayor for a big fancy announcement to invest $750,000 into community-led crime prevention initiatives. It's been more than a year and the money still hasn't arrived. These were funds to help prevent violence last summer. We're now into this summer. We're still waiting. As part of this motion, it's directing the mayor to write directly to the premier and the minister responsible. Thank you very much.
Okay. On page 5, CD 21.13, Councillor Cressy is released. All in favor? Carried. Deputy Mayor Minnan-Wong.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Page 7, Striking Committee, ST 13.3, Council member appointments to the Heritage Nominating Panel. Council's emissaries have approached Councillor Hart, who politely declined and didn't show very much interest in serving on the Heritage Nominating Panel. I am flummoxed as to why he would have that opinion, but be that as may, I have a motion that I'd like to put up on the screen, that City Council refer the item back to the City Clerk for further consideration.
Okay, on page 7, ST 13.3, the motion is on the screen. Recorded vote.
Councillor Grimes, please.
Councillor Kelly, please. Councillor DeGiorgio. And Councillor Wong-Tam, please.
Mayor Tory.
The motion carries unanimously, 35 in favor.
Councillor Fletcher.
Yes. Yes, Speaker. Page 5, Economic Development Committee, ED 22.4. It's a Spotlight on Toronto, a strategic plan for the film, television, and digital media industry. And I would just like to say that this is a fantastic strategic action plan, and thank the General Manager, Economic Development, the fantastic members in our film, television office, entertainment office, and the great team we have on the film board, and also the mayor for his undying attention to this really important industry, the missions that have been taken on behalf of the city to Los Angeles, also Mumbai, and that Toronto is still poised to have another record-breaking year in film, and we have a number of really important initiatives that will continue us on that trajectory. So I'd like to move in this and ask for a recorded vote, Speaker.
Thank you. On page 5, ED 22.4, Councillor Fletcher is releasing recorded vote.
Councillor DiCiano, please.
The item is adopted unanimously, 36 in favor.
Councillor Wong Tam.
Good morning, Madam Speaker. On page 5, I'd like to release ED 22.9, amendments to Toronto Municipal Code Chapter 19, Business Improvement Areas. And then there is a second one.
Okay, on page 5, ED 22.9, all in favor? Carried. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Madam Speaker, on page 11, MM 31.2, direction to City Planning to form a working group for the development proposal at 183 to 189 Avenue Road and 109 to 111 Paris Avenue. It's the first item on top of the page. I have a quick amendment. This is a deferred item from last month. I just have to amend the date in the motion, and there it is.
Okay, that's on the top of page 11, MM 31.2, which was a deferred member's motion. The amendment's on the screen. All in favor? Recorded vote.
Councillor Mihevc, please. Councillor Palacio.
Councillor Wong Tam, please, and Councillor Layton.
The amendment carries unanimously, 36 in favor.
The item as amended, all in favor? Carried. Mayor Tory?
Yes, Madam Speaker. Item EX 26.25, proposed Aboriginal office for the City of Toronto. I have a motion which we can put up, which has been discussed with Councillor Layton. And I'm sorry, it's page 3. I believe he is content with it, and it really just wants to get a bit more information or give a bit more direction to the city manager or a bit more advice with respect to some things we should take into account in writing up this report about an Aboriginal office.
Okay, on page 3, EX 26.25, the amendment's on the screen. All in favor? Carried. Item is amended. Recorded.
Councillor McMahon, please. Councillor Wong Tam. Councillor Layton, please.
Councillor Mihevc, please.
Councillor Layton.
The item as amended carries unanimously, 36 in favor.
Thank you. Councillor Carroll.
Oh, thank you, Madam Speaker. Yes, on page 5, ED 22.8, profile of Toronto's evolving Ontario Works caseload profile. Madam Speaker, I had intended to write a motion. I think there's more that we can do, not through tests, but through the business community on the issues of precarious work and the longer-standing vulnerable community staying on OW longer. But I'll serve a motion at a later date to that committee. Thank you.
On page 5, ED 22.8, recorded vote.
Councillor DiGiorgio, please. Councillor McMahon. Councillor Layton, please. Councillor Davis and Councillor Pasternak, please.
Councillor Grimes, please.
The item carries unanimously, 36 in favor.
All those in favor of adopting the order paper? Carried. Okay. Councillor Mamlidi.
Madam Speaker, last meeting, and I talked to the clerk already, and I understand that a motion needs to be passed, and that's why I'm standing. But there was a member's motion that Councillor Matlow held of mine. We'd gone through the process, and typically when we have things left over from the last meeting, they would be debated, they'd be shown first. It's my understanding that I need to move a motion just asking that the things that were left over from last meeting to be dealt with after the key items today. I don't understand why that happened.
Yeah, the clerk explained it, but I think that what you want is you want to make the item time-specific.
My understanding that anything that was left over from last meeting, a motion needs to be...
So do you want to move a motion to make that item time-specific?
All items that were left over from last meeting, I would say we should deal with first. No?
Well, we've got two more. So
just a couple.
That would be... So that would be the member's motion and as well the deferred items for T24.72 traffic control signals. You make that following the two items that are time specific this morning. Okay, by Councillor Mamalidi, all in favor? Recorded vote.
You could have a show of hands and just, you can just count.
Councillor Grimes is very summary today. The bright color is blinding me.
Councillor Davis, please.
The motion carries 20-16.
Thank you. Members, before we go to the two timed items this morning, I would like to draw your attention the material we have before us on item AU 9.12. At the Audit Committee meeting, the Chair ruled that the confidential attachment to the Auditor General's report was a public document. The City Clerk subsequently posted the public attachment on the City's website. We also have a supplementary report from the City Manager with a confidential attachment distributed yesterday. I wish to caution members that the only confidential information we have before us on item AU 9.12 is the City Manager's supplementary attachment. Any questions or debate on the Auditor General's report are public. And everyone received a copy of the supplementary report yesterday. All right. So, on page 4, AU 9.12. So, do we have questions, or did you want, Councillor Holliday, did you want...
Yes,
Councillor Holliday.
Thank you, Speaker. Given the weight of this report and the experience of the Audit Committee, I wondered if I could call upon the Auditor General to spend a few minutes to take us through this before we go through questions to make it a really efficient process.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
Thank you.
So if we can have the presentation, yeah.
Good morning, Council. This is part two of a two-part report. And it arose from a complaint from Councillor Filion. Councillor Filion sits on the TPA board. And he was looking at a transaction as the board was, and he was trying to get information to support what he felt to be his due diligence in making sure that the land transaction supported the purchase price. And the purchase price was over $12 million. There's two parts to the transaction. On the property there's a sign, so the land has a value and the sign has a value. It's a digital sign. And the key dates here is the complaint came in on September 1st, and on September 2nd, I undertook this complaint myself. I went in and did an immediate investigation. On the 15th, the board was due to do its final review for approval of the transaction, and before the next board meeting, the transaction was ready to proceed. So there was one board meeting left. I arrived on the 2nd, and I had to report it on the 15th. When I got to the board on the 15th, I asked them to delay the transaction, and the reason was I had extreme difficulty in obtaining the documentation necessary, documentation one would expect to be in the file. I actually had to take extraordinary measures to obtain the documents that I actually did obtain. So there's two parts. My first report identified that the TPA was at risk of overpaying over $2.5 million for this property, and the second part was related to the issues that made the reason this came to be. But before I go any further, I want to talk about the scope of this transaction. City Council approved the transaction back in March of 2015, and I don't take issue with the fact that City Council approved the transaction. It was for land that was near the LRT. There was the EV, the Emery Village BIA, wanted to put a flagpole on the land. I didn't look at the value and the issue of the flagpole for many years. The Emery Village BIA has been trying to get council to support them, and council has passed some resolutions to support having a flagpole built on that land. So there's been a lot of history around this. I'm sure it's come before you before. But when council approved for TPA to purchase the land at fair market value, what that means is TPA is only authorized to purchase that land at fair market value. So when I came in, I found that it didn't. So the negotiated price was $12.18 million. The land was valued at around $8 million. There was a valuation, a draft valuation done in 2015. The land was at 7.5. A second valuation was done this year by a company that purchased the company who had done the first valuation. It was at $8 million. I conducted an independent valuation. The real estate appraiser came in at $7.75 million. So giving the benefit of the doubt to the TPA, around $8 million for 4.65 acres, not quite 5 acres of land. So the land and the sign. And what I noticed at that point was the agreement for purchase and sale was beyond the authority at that point in time by $80,000 of the TPA. So management agreed. We had gone back and forth, and in the end, when I came with my valuation and I had a chartered business valuator do work, I had a forensic investigator do work with me, and we came to the conclusion that the land and the sign were worth no more than about $9.55. So the deal was overpriced by $2.63. The board at that point in time was I found to be more concerned with trying to pursue the deal rather than saying, wait a second here, we're over by $2.63 million. So that was a concern for me. I took it away and I thought I'd come back and see what happened in the deal. So it's really worth the read of going through the report. And in the back, I summarized the front part into findings. In the back is a chronology. It's not everything. I have 135 pages of a chronology. This is just some of the highlights of the chronology. It's really hard to explain certain aspects until you actually read. It's in the emails. It's in the valuation. But I want to summarize 5 areas that I had concerns just to give you an overview. The first area is not obtaining a business valuator to value the sign, or somebody who is at least independent. Now the sign is worth 1/3 of the property. They valued the sign at $4 to $4.5 million. That's pretty significant. When you're in a professional organization and you're dealing with public money, transparency is absolute, so you have to have that. The second is the conflicts and potential conflicts of interest with the lobbyist, also with the sign consultant. What I found, and I actually tried to draw it, but it would just be a hairball. It was a hairball of relationships that went from the, and I'll go over those individually. The third is when the sign, the bottom line for the vendor appeared to be $12 million. The land was valued at $8 million. We have a gap of $4 million. With that gap, the sign that was on the property was only worth about $1.5 million, maybe $2 million. We had a $2 million gap. So what happened was TPA became involved with trying to maximize the value of the sign. And the actual sign on the property didn't really cut it, so they put in a potential for a second sign and use that valuation to come to $4 million. I'll explain that going forward. The fourth is the difficulty in obtaining information and consistent in having inconsistent explanations during the investigation process. It took a while. Even at the very end, when we were clearing the report, the debrief of the report was concerning because new information was coming to light, relevant information was coming to light, information that should have been in the first meeting, not the last meeting. And the fifth is the opportunities to improve board functioning. So I'm going to go through these very quickly. First is, we talked about having an independent sign valuator. So the sign valuator was actually worked for TPA. He was the person who worked for the vendor on this deal. So the person who was representing the vendor was CAPTA Holdings of the land, and the sign on the deal was owned by DeLuca. And DeLuca had hired the sign consultant in 2009 to bring the deal together to put the sign on the land. He represented, the sign consultant represented the vendor on this deal when he went before council to get a variance for the sign. So he was involved with the vendor. He worked for TPA as their sign consulting doing their deals. And the lobbyist represented the sign consultant over 200 times in the lobbyist registrar, in the registry. So the lobbyist was lobbying for the sign consultant to get more sign deals on various pieces of land. So that was a concern. So when I looked at the deal, what I found was there wasn't sufficient sign income. You take the net present value of the income for the sign, and generally that's how you value a sign. I checked with my real estate appraiser. You often find assets on land. This is the way that they usually value it. You can have additional information added to that. But what I found was that the first sign, they said, the sign consultant I found was forthright, and he said that it didn't come up, the value, the income from the sign didn't actually support the $4 million, the gap. So what they talked about, the VP asked if there was a way that they can maximize the revenue on the land. And the way they thought about maximizing the revenue was to think about the Ministry of Transportation was actually having a consultation. It wasn't a consultation to bring digital signs. It was a consultation and feedback about digital signs and third-party signs. And the sign consultant thought at that point in time it might be 25%. There was a meeting, there was notes from the meeting, 25% chance the Ministry of Transportation was going to allow a sign on that property. Now, in 2009, when the sign consultant tried to get a sign on the property, Ministry of Transportation said, no, any sign along 400, facing 400, you cannot get a sign. There was consultation. They were taking signs down in 2013. You know, I could see that in my research. But we phoned the Ministry of Transportation, and they said it is a stretch if you think you're going to have a digital sign along 400. I spoke to the sign lobbyist who was lobbying for the signs, and he said that maybe there's a possibility, but you can't rely on it. So what TPA did, though, was say there's a 25% chance, based on what they said came from the sign consultant. And they did an income stream, and they valued the 25% chance of getting the sign, a second proposed sign, at $1.8 million to add to the original value and say, now it's worth $4 million, and that value was going to be paid to the person who was selling the land. So that was a concern for us. So I arrived on the, I was informed at 3:30 on the 1st of September. So immediately by noontime on the 2nd of September, I met with TPA and asked them for all of their documents. As the Auditor General, I'm entitled to all the documents. And when I met with them at noontime, I finished around 12:30. At 1:30, the sign consultant had completed his final version of the dual sign, the proposed sign and the old sign, and the fake sign and the real sign, okay? And within 24 hours of my arrival, they changed the entire approach because they decided maybe we can't rely on a sign that's non-existent. The sign consultant and TPA said that from Ministry of Transportation, rumblings were that it went down, that it was no longer feasible. But think about it. Since January of 2015, when the offer went in, you had 5 or 6 months in order to determine the value of a sign that's worth 1/3 of the property. And it's the day after I arrive, within 24 hours. So they started a new approach. And on September 4th, from the sign consultant, in his new approach, he wrote and said, here's my note, here's my calculations. It's fairly aggressive, and that the delta between the appraised value and the purchase price is about $3.5 million. And why don't the three of us get together so we can discuss this? So what I saw happening was trying to fit that gap to get to the fair market value, because it was to get to the purchase price, which was not fair market value, because it appeared that the vendor was not going to come down. What's also important here was the calculations that were being done for the current sign and the proposed sign, and many of the calculations being done here were actually being done by the VP, sent over to the sign consultant. Sign consultant put his letterhead on the document, sent the documents back. So, but for me obtaining emails to show these transactions, you would not know, if you received the sign consultant's valuation, that actually the calculations were prepared by the VP. Admittedly, the actual numbers crunching is based on assumptions that were brought up together. But even the involvement at that point of the VP, and if it was just number crunching, why not just put a note, these calculations are prepared by the VP? But that didn't happen. So this is the concern. We had two signs. It was changed to now one sign. They used a multiples approach, and it's an approach that is used, but I didn't have faith in it. The market didn't bear it out. The forensic auditor didn't have faith in it, and neither did the business evaluator. So the second point is around the potential conflicts of interest. So the lobbyist on this deal has been working on this deal since 2008. All the invoices reference the flagpole. It's well over $1 million that's been spent in lobbying fees alone for this monument. There's another monument that's another $500,000 that's been spent. Monument is not existing either. So these fees are paid by the EVBIA. So there appears to be, from the get-go, the lobbyist involved with the negotiations. Now, what was of concern for me here is that from the very beginning, I was trying to obtain information about how they come up with the purchase price. You don't pull $12 million out of thin air. You find out, you do calculations. And only in the last debriefs, and I'll go through what happened, but in the last debrief meeting, I found out that the lobbyist, that the VP actually was not doing the calculations to come up with the $12 million price. The lobbyist was in the room, from her words, he was in the room, and she received a call from the lobbyist on what the price would be for the land, and that was the price they used. So part of the reason I couldn't obtain information was she said she wasn't there to do the negotiation. What had happened, well, I'll go back to that a little later on, but so that was a concern. So the lobbyist was involved with the negotiations, was in the room, gave the price to the VP. The financing for the flagpole, TPA, there's a $5 million at least minimal expenditure for a flagpole, and he was the person bringing that to TPA, and so that didn't happen. It didn't. The flagpole didn't come to fruition, but it was financing was being developed in that. I have invoices referencing, for in-camera information, I have invoices referencing the lobbyist as monitoring TPA board meetings on this matter. On this matter, I was debriefing September 15th on this matter, and the October invoice showed 2 times that the lobbyist was monitoring the TPA meeting. And I had discussed that with the lobbyists, had a concern about that. So there's a couple of other pieces of information that has led me to believe that a lot of the information, or some of the information, key information about a deal, the lobbyist was aware of. And it was key information. He had copies of the agreements of purchase and sale. So from the very beginning, from January, February, May, all the way through, as the deal would change, the lobbyist had copies of the agreements of purchase and sale. And this becomes relevant if the lobbyist is also, his objectives are to get a site and get financing to build the flagpole and bring the flagpole to get it built, to an RFP stage to get it built. So if you're aware of the price and the value and the financing, and if a development deal is in or out, then that information may be, it just might give more information to one person who can benefit from it. So I found it a concern that he was copied on the agreements of purchase and sale, also that he had access to potential in-camera information. He was providing TPA with media advice, at least that was what the billing was for. He had a communication plan that referenced who from the board would be speaking. I found the connections to be more like a hairball. And then on top of that, the sign consultant who we hired to value the deal was represented by the lobbyist over 200 times. The lobbyist stood to benefit if this deal happened, because from the perspective that the land is purchased, tick, that's one of the contract items. There's financing trying to get underway for the flagpole, tick, that's the other one. So he would benefit. So he had an interest in this deal going through, and the sign consultant was his client, and he worked extensively on behalf of the sign consultant. So the question is, do I think at this point in time that the sign consultant did something from the lobbyist to influence this deal? I could not see that. I found it was being pushed mainly from TPA, but I think in hindsight, the sign consultant said, in hindsight, I can see how the optics don't look good, and you know, I think that that's something that's important. So that was the lobbyist, my concerns there for the potential for conflicts. TPA was way too close in valuing this sign. So the VP of Real Estate and Development was not involved where I thought she should have been involved, which would be upfront negotiating, doing the hard negotiating to get the deal, getting the analysis done to substantiate why we're going forward, but was involved with asking the sign consultant to maximize the value on that sign, even if you have to go to, of course, 2 signs, to preparing the calculations to send to the sign consultant, because he's a consultant. He's not an evaluator. It's not his role. It's not what he does. Generally, he's more like a broker. If you let me look at your land, let me look and see what we can get here. Let's try it. There's a potential. There's a possibility. There's no guarantee. That's not what we value our deals on. So she was involved with him for the potential section sign. The final version of the report, she asked him to put on letterhead. They helped with changing the methodology. And I think a lot of concern was she asked the sign consultant in his second report, after the first one, after I arrived, the first one went by the wayside in the second report, she asked the sign consultant to backdate his report to September 1st and include a line, I have completed my analysis at September 1st. Now, it's not uncommon where you have a deal, where you say it's effective on a certain date. That's not what this says. This says, I completed my analysis as at September 1st. The analysis for the methodology that was used was not started until September 3rd, after I arrived, not before I arrived. So that was a concern. So this just shows that the consultant had not commenced the work until the September 3rd. Another example was originally she informed the real estate appraiser, he's a reputable person, and he informed him that she wanted to have the sign consultant's valuation attached to the back of his report. And he said, sure. But when the evaluation came in, he said, I do not wish to state their conclusions in the appraisal document. Even adding them would give the illusion that the land was worth $12 million, and he had a concern about putting his name on the 12 million. So he added it on the letterhead of the sign consultant. But the VP, when that answer came back, and after going back and forth and saying, I don't even want to add them together because I don't want to give the illusion that it's okay, the VP wrote to the president of TPA and said, I don't want to go final yet. I'm going to reach out to another VP at the real estate firm, her former colleague, and see if he can get the president or the head of the firm to change his mind and to add put them together and add them. And I can see why potentially he didn't want to add them. Normally in these kinds of deals, at least from the real estate consultant that we had, he said we do it on an income-based approach because it's so variable. And I can see why he didn't want to add it, and he was concerned with this multiples approach from even an evaluator. He's more of a sales consultant. So difficulty obtaining information. So when my first interview, I was told there's no documentation, that it was done on the back of an envelope. I did receive, I have to say, I received a file of some historic documents that came from the EVBIA, but I didn't receive anything related to this transaction. Even draft agreements of purchase and sale, valuations. There was a lot of valuations done with the sign consultant. There's a lot of emails back and forth. I didn't receive anything. And she just said she did it based on $2 million an acre. And I found in the documents later sent to me a project note that referenced 2 appraisals. So I thought, there must be appraisals since I'm not getting them. And I figured, they said the median of the 2 appraisals was $12 million. So I thought, well, the vendor wanted $17 million, so he must have 1 appraisal. The second appraisal has to be around $7.5 to $8 million. It has to be in that range in order to come to $12 million as the average price. No, nothing coming, don't know about an appraisal, don't know what you're talking about. And then what happened was I asked for any information and appraisal information from the prior firm who was her firm, because I figured that it would probably be from the firm. And sure enough, there was a draft appraisal that was done that was worth $7.5 million, right on where I thought it should be. And the lobbyist had noted the same thing. The lobbyist said he thought there were 2 appraisals, and he thought it may have been that they averaged the 2, and that's how they arrived at the price. And he was the person that called her at the $12 million. So I had problems. We talked about the lobbyist coming up with the price. I requested documents several times. This will give you one piece of an email. Confirm that you have provided copies of the entire file for the property, emails, notes, other documents, electronic records, everything you have related to the property. Please send on any missing documents. This was after interviewing and following up with an email. Interviewing, following up with an email. I'm asking for everything. We're purchasing the documents, and I didn't get the signed valuation. I didn't get prior draft appraisals. I didn't get evaluation letters. There was documents, one document or a couple, deleted after I made the request. And the document that was deleted was a document where the calculations were prepared for the sign consultant and sent on to the sign consultant. So it was concerning. So opportunities to improve, this is the last category. So the board, it was challenging because when you're a board member, it is critical that you have sufficient information to make a decision. We are a business. We provide services to the public, but inside we are a professionally run organization. We should be akin to, a board that you would sit on, a corporate board of some sort. And so it's important to have sufficient and timely information. And if you are uncomfortable with that, you have to put your hand up. Having the same amount of information was a challenge. Some members had toured the property, some members didn't. Some members knew about the involvement of the lobbyists, some members didn't. It was a mishmash of information, and the information wasn't timely. There's a lack of understanding of procedural matters, so on top of the substantive issues, there was arguments back and forth about what was needed, how to get the information, and there was not one or another who was at fault. There was a lot of different people who had made mistakes, and I thought the board had challenges, and there was some of the board meetings I attended, there was some intense discussion, I can say. And one of the things was concerning for me. The board chair had said, when you look back at all of this, and the reason the councillor came to me, he may have been right or he may have been wrong. He had, I mean, at that point in time, he said, I don't know if there's any fire. I don't even know if there's smoke. I just don't feel comfortable, and I just want somebody, because now that we're proceeding with it, somebody has just to make sure that the information's there. And with that, I guess what I found was, like, this would be an example of an email. There's others. You know, saying that coming to the AG is nothing more than a desperate attempt to create another false problem with this process and to stifle the progress towards finalizing the deal. The focus was on the deal to get it done, in my view, at costs that, you know, in my view, could have cost the city an issue. So I think the transaction, by coming to me, I think that the process worked. We have to look at transparency. We had concerns about the issues around, you know, the conflicts. The board has learned a lot here, but you know, that's really a summary of what happened. I have deep concerns, and I'll just turn it over to, I mean, that's the end of my project. If you have any questions, I'll answer those questions.
Thank you. Do you have questions? Councillor Davis. Councillor Davis?
Thank you, Speaker. I just wanted to ask, so who were the parties, could you summarize quickly who the parties were that the lobbyist was acting for? Maybe I can just list who I think it is.
Okay.
Emery Village BIA? Yes. The sign company?
Yes.
The TPA, they were giving advice to or seemed to be acting closely with.
His bills indicate that, yes.
What indicates that?
His invoices to the EVBIA indicate that he was prepping TPA, he was monitoring TPA meetings, giving communication advice.
Okay, but he wasn't working specifically. However, he was acting in a relationship that between the EVBIA and the TPA.
And the vendor to come up with the price of the deal.
And the vendor. And the sign consultant?
Yes.
At one point, he was also...
He still is the lobbyist for the sign consultant. He's represented 200 times in the last 5 years.
Okay. So this person was connected to everyone in this circle of players?
Yes.
And the amount is in the public domain.
It is.
$1 million.
It is. For that one monument, one thing, there's another monument that he's working on also.
And that $1 million, the consultant billed to the Emery Village BIA was over what period of time?
From 3 years, Madam Speaker, from 2008, probably mid-year June, until today, till November 2016.
Okay, so it was over a period of time.
Yeah, it's about $100,000 a year.
$100,000 a year. To the BIA staff, is this an expense you would be aware of? The BIA was put in their budgets. What sort of oversight is there on this kind of expenditure for lobbyists?
Sorry, Councillor, could you repeat the first part of that question?
I'm just wondering if the $1 million paid to a consultant by a BIA is an expenditure that the BIA office might have some concern about or oversee?
Well, as you heard, it was done over a number of years. The line item does appear in the budget as consultant. It doesn't specify who, and it was well within the financial capacity of that BIA, which his annual budget is about $2 million.
Okay.
For that particular expense.
It seemed that the Toronto Parking Authority was attempting to get a deal at all costs, it seemed. They were attempting to put together or create a revenue stream from 2 signs that were not feasible in order to come up with the amount of money that this particular vendor was seeking. Would you agree that that's generally was at play here?
I agree that they had lost their independence and that they were trying to get this deal to be completed. I think in part to satisfy council, but there's probably more.
So the other thing that's in common is that the councillor who sits on the TPA is also a councillor on the Emery Village board, and who has for many years wanted to achieve this feature or this flag at this location. Do you think that there was a bit of conflict of interest there in terms of acting both as a representative of the BIA and of the TPA board?
I believe that it's within the purview of the Integrity Commissioner to look at councillors and also board members. But what I will say is, in general, on a board, disclosure of information that you have, disclosure of potential for conflict, disclosure of this information is critical to the successful functioning of the board.
So, do you have information about how the lobbyist got the confidential documents about the deal?
Through you, Madam Speaker, in relation to the agreements of purchase and sale, yes, they were provided by TPA successively as they were negotiated to the lobbyist.
I thought there was a question about how he received confidential documents from a closed session.
So
that was your last question.
Sure. There was through you, Madam Speaker, there's two areas. The first area is receiving the transaction documents, which are the agreement of purchase and sale. That's the first thing. And so he received those from TPA, and I believe he was helping with some of the negotiation there. That's my belief. In relation to the in-camera meeting, I'm going by the billings and the report from the lobbyist register. He billed for monitoring TPA meetings from time to time, including the meeting that I was at to give my verbal report in September. The other thing was in relation to reporting out to the TPA. It was said he was explaining that the board authorized certain things to happen. That information is within my report. I can refer you to the pages.
Thank you. Councillor Pasternak.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. When I hear about transactions, real estate transactions from the Toronto Parking Authority, I figure they're buying land for parking. Yet now I'm hearing all these stories about signs and flagpoles. What was the core reason for eyeing this property? What was the long-term corporate objective for even taking a look at this?
Thank you. Through you, Madam Speaker, from what I've been able to determine, the EVBIA has had the objective of developing a gateway to the Emery Village. It wasn't feasible in 2010. With the LRT going in, the land became a little bit more attractive, and it became part of the public realm strategy. And as part of the public realm strategy, it was meant to, at least from the council's note, for biking and for it was meant to have bike paths and a gateway. It's meant for a lot of different things, including parking. The amount of parking on that property was estimated to be about 70 spaces. It's not a lot. So there were some public service things that were approved by council in March 2016, I'm sorry, that related to the bike paths and the gateway and the flagpole. But council wanted the land purchased at fair market value, and that's what was important.
So I just want to understand this. This was all about, and the mandate of Toronto Parking Authority is pretty clear. Its corporate mission is pretty clear. This is all about 70 spaces?
Yes, correct. That's from the president of TPA, yes.
All right. What would be the payback for a $12 million purchase on the revenue from 70 spaces?
Thank you. To you, Madam Chair. I don't have that with me, but it's certainly not enough to support this transaction. I think they were also considering speculative value of the land, but the land hadn't increased that much over the year.
So as an economic model, this made no sense at all. Where were you going to get $5 a day from these spaces? And okay. Enough said on that. Was the City of Toronto lobbyist registrar brought in on this investigation to make sure all the rules were followed at that end of this problem?
I have informed her of the file, and she will determine on her own motion what she would like to do to proceed with this. So that would be a question for her.
Now, about the sign, I assume the sign was sitting on this parcel of land. I mean, I'm not a real estate expert, but couldn't you buy the land underneath it without actually owning the sign, the way they do with
Thank you. Through you,
wind power?
Through you, Madam Speaker, yes. You could, but the issue is that it's not uncommon when the city goes to purchase land that there's assets on the land, and that asset does have a contributory value. So I've worked with legal, I've checked with a real estate consultant. It's not uncommon to have that situation, but you have to decide what you're willing to pay for that, and that's.
Well, why are we even getting involved in buying a private sector sign? Why didn't we just say we want the land, we don't want the sign? We'll rent you the land for X number of dollars per year. Why did we get so messy with that sign?
Thank you. Through you, Madam Speaker, that's a question for TPA.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Burnside.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Through you to the auditor. Point number 19, you talked about, or you referred to this idea of adding a second sign to the property, and there's a 25% chance. That was based on the consultant's opinion, correct?
So, through you, Madam Speaker, I believe it. So. Answer is yes, but it was a discussion that happened. It was a meeting that happened in mid-July, and the notes from that meeting show that the sign consultant and the VP agreed with the 25%.
But I believe you also further stated that the rules up to that point had stated that no signs could face Highway 400.
Correct. So there's no legal ability to permit.
Right. So it really comes down to the opinion of the people involved. Which is where I want to go with the consultant himself. I believe what you stated in your report, the consultant was in fact chosen by the TPA, correct? The sign consultant.
Correct.
But that sign consultant had a previous relationship with the vendor dating back to 2009.
Correct.
Okay. Was there a reason given as to why the TPA would have chosen this particular person to value the sign as opposed to, I believe you called it, an independent business valuator?
Through you, Madam Speaker, there was. And the reason was that he had been the TPA's sign guy, is the sign person, sign consultant, to collect revenues on for TPA signs that TPA had. And so he was asked. Now, I was informed later on, after I had determined through my various analysis and through my forensic auditor and through my independent consultant, that they were always going to get an independent valuation, but that explanation did not hold water for me at all.
So did you find it strange that if someone was always going to get an independent valuator, why they wouldn't just do that in the beginning and say...
There was no, through you, Madam Speaker, there was no mention of the independent valuator until I presented my findings, and then they went to the market themselves and they agreed with my findings. I went back to the market myself. We agreed with the findings on the sign.
Now, from your report, it looks like the TPA was looking for ways to justify the additional purchase price of this property. That's what I inferred. But when people are purchasing property, well, did you not find that a bit odd? Because in my experience, when you purchase something, you're always looking for ways in a negotiation to downplay the value as opposed to justify for the seller.
Through you, Madam Speaker, it appeared that the vendor's bottom line was $12 million. At least that's what TPA had informed me of several times, and informed the board. And so the vendor wasn't coming down. And so with the land valued at what it was, the issue was that it didn't quite meet it. And I actually asked the sign consultant, we were going to pay an extra $4 million. If it's wrong, would you cut a check for $4 million? He said he would not be cutting a check for $4 million because it's a possibility. He was, I have to be honest, he was asked to maximize the sign. He was doing as he was asked by his client. He wasn't paid to do this. That's another thing. There was no engagement letter. There was no professionalism around it. He was asked, what is the maximum value you could possibly get? That's not how you value a property. You get an independent valuation based on evidence.
Okay, thank you. I just have one last question through the speaker. It may not be to you, but are there any circumstances where, certainly in the in government, where it's acceptable to backdate documents? I'm not sure who that question is to.
I don't know.
I'll repeat it, probably through you to the city manager. Are there any circumstances where backdating documents would be deemed acceptable?
None that come to mind on the surface, but obviously that's a question that needs to be investigated.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor DiCiano.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you to the Auditor General, just for some clarity on your presentation, there was 2 dates. September the 15th, 2016 was a board meeting, and then October the 18th, 2016 was where the property was set to go firm. Was September the 15th the last board meeting where a decision had to be made, or was there going to be another opportunity to make a decision to go firm?
Through you, Madam Chair, that was the last date.
September the 15th?
Correct.
So they were going to make a decision to go firm on the 15th?
Correct, and I might add to that, yeah, that's correct. The evaluations were actually due to come in on the 13th or the 12th of September, and through Councillor Filion, they came in around the 9th of September, so they had between the 9th and the 15th to review the valuations.
Okay. And you mentioned that there was an appraisal for $17 million. Can you tell us which firm prepared that appraisal? Were they a reputable firm?
Through you, Madam Speaker, that would be the vendor's appraisal. I had heard that the properties were not true comparables, that they were, and so that's where the issue lied. And so the firm that prepared TPA's first draft appraisal came in at 7.5, and that's where mine came in, and that's where the second appraisal came in from a different firm for TPA.
So do we know who prepared the 17?
I do.
Was it a reputable firm?
I didn't do work around that, so I just would prefer not to speak to that.
Okay. On page 9 of your report, item number 30, where the VP wrote to the President, do you have a response email from the President?
I'm going to, through you, Madam Chair, I don't on the surface, but I'm going to actually ask my my colleague here, my senior investigator, to have a look, because we would have that within a chronology if it's here.
Okay. So I guess I'll come back to that? Yes, please. Okay, thank you. That's all for now. I'll come back to that question, Madam Chair.
Thank you. So you have 2.5 minutes left after that. Councillor Hart.
Speaker, to the Auditor General, at the bottom of page 18 in your report, going back to the in-camera meeting, you noted that the lobbyist advised you that we would have monitored what came out of the meeting, but we wouldn't have known what it was. Did you dig deeper into a line of questioning with regard to that response? Because that answer is a little bit curious.
So if you refer, through you, Madam Speaker, if you refer to paragraph 111 on page 72 of the chronology, that was an area where there was trouble explaining 2 times monitoring the board meeting on that one invoice. And so he couldn't, I said, I'm trying to figure out how, and then he said, I want to be clear, I have not read any reports that are confidential. I know Ma'am Malidi was very upset. The reports were actual verbal reports. There was no report to read. So He finally came down to maybe that was a mistake, but I had, you can make a mistake once, but not a couple of times, so that's what I was concerned about.
Just a follow-up question. Did you refer that specific matter to anyone else?
The lobbyist registrar is reviewing the file.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Fletcher? Okay, okay. Councillor Mammoliti?
Madam Speaker, I'd like to ask questions of the TPA, please.
I don't know if they're here.
Well, they should be here, shouldn't they?
Do we have TPA here?
And then I have in-camera questions as well.
Okay, so then we'll go in camera and maybe we can invite them to come.
Oh.
No?
I think my line of questioning is really in reference to many of the issues that have been brought up with the TPA, and I'd like some answers to some questions.
Well, so then we would go in camera for those questions, Councillor Mammoliti. Do you have any questions right now, public questions?
I think everybody would agree that the TPA should be here to answer some questions.
Well, they're not here. The city manager can answer on behalf of the TPA. So do you have any questions?
I have an in-camera question as well that relates to this.
Okay. We'll go in camera, but right now, do you have any questions right now, public questions?
I have, okay, I'll ask my questions of the economic development.
Okay.
Just with respect to the history of this particular project that's been mentioned. This initiated about 20 years ago, did it not? At the corner of Weston Road and Finch, the initial site for a square was to be where the gas station is. And that came with the official plan amendments that the city made at that time?
That was before my time, but my understanding is that's right.
And then there was an OMB hearing. The ESSO at the time appealed the official plan, and the targeted area for the square would have been the work site, which is a city-owned site just west of that gas station. Is that accurate?
There was some talk of that, apparently, yes.
The city declared that site surplus, did it not? And at that point, the square was highlighted to be built on government land, on city land?
I don't know those specifics. I'm sorry, Councillor.
Would you know, perhaps somebody might know that at one given time after it was designated for the square, that the city decided that they needed the land and it wouldn't suit the square at that particular time, so that the scope changed yet again?
That's my understanding, yes.
And all that time it was a BIA initiative, was it not? That they would take some capital money and invest it in the square.
That's correct.
That's been an ongoing project for quite some time.
That's correct.
And at this point, it would be about 16 or 17 years ago when that site was then determined by staff that in fact you can't really have it for the square anymore. We might need it.
Yeah, I wasn't here then, but that staff are indicating that's correct.
So the BIA was forced to find another location at that particular time because the city backed out. At that point, there was if I recall, there was a committee of adjustment hearing that dealt with an application for a hotel, I believe, on the site in question today, which is the Arrow Road and Finch site. There was a committee of adjustment application that included a sign and a square built out by the particular developer and owner.
I'm not aware of the committee of adjustment process myself personally. I do remember that project being mentioned. That was right when I started in 2009, 2010.
Mr. Williams, just for for the sake of clarity. Staff have met with each mayor and strategized around each of these proposals in the past, did they not? In other words, it was a council resolution every time to take the square on and to make it a joint venture with the BIA.
I can only speak to 2010, which that is the case. We brought a report to council and it was passed. The deal never was completed, but that was the direction from council.
And before 2010, was it not Mayor Miller at the time that we met with? I think you were part of those meetings that spoke to buying the site at Arrow Road and Finch prior to 2010?
We were trying to figure out a way that met the BIA code and that met the goals of the BIA itself and the goals of the city, so we did explore options at that time, yes.
So not only did we explore options, but the city actually, after the council resolution prior to 2010, with Mayor Miller there at the time, tried to negotiate with the vendor, and I guess real estate was doing those negotiations on behalf of the city, were they not?
They were involved, yes.
And what was the value of the land at that time? Do you recall? City had an opportunity to buy it. Do you recall what the value was? I think it was $5 million.
I was going to say 4 to 5, but so that would be in the ballpark. We never established an exact value for it.
And then the LRT was born, and the dialogue along Finch Avenue was born. And with that dialogue came more negotiations and another report that came to council that said buy the land. It was a city drafted report that this council approved. It said buy the land, TPA, for market value, because there were significant upgrades to the LRT, such as the bicycle paths, and the Metrolinx was at the time getting at they might contribute to the legacy project, which is the square and the flagpole. Is it accurate that report very quickly summed up what was going on that site, and even a staging site perhaps for the LRT project?
Thank you. That was
economic development was not involved in that project, but that's my understanding.
Okay. Can someone answer that question? Well, doesn't have the answer.
But it was a report that came.
Yeah. So maybe you can ask staff offline. Councillor Carmichael Greb.
Thank you.
No, but your time is up. Offline, Councillor Mammoliti. I gave you 6 minutes. Yeah. Councillor Mammoliti.
Madam Chair, I finished the question. I think this particular question is vital to this particular item, given that it was council that asked the TPA to buy the land through a city staff report that dealt with all of the capital investments that Metrolinx and the city were prepared to.
Councillor Mammoliti, does anybody have the answer?
No. So,
we're not going to.
Madam Chair, there was a council direction for the parking authority to go and purchase the land. That is correct.
Was it a part of the Metrolinx LRT project? That particular report.
The parking authority at the time knew the LRT was coming through, and they were looking at the lands for potential LRT commuter parking.
Councillor Mammoliti, your time is way up. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Maybe you can.
I'm sorry, I can't recall who wrote the report.
That was your last question. Councillor Carmichael Greb.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Through you to the Auditor General. One of your recommendations was that at least one board member on each agency board should hold a director's designation qualification. Could you just explain a little bit as to why you put this and why this in the report and why this is important?
Thank you. Through you, Madam Speaker. The boards are now hiring people who have a designation. We are a professional organization. I know many of the councillors, or some of the councillors, have taken this, and when you go through it, you realize what happened in this case, in my view, possibly could have been somewhat, we may have had a different outcome if the skill set that is brought through a professional designation came to bear. So as the city moves forward and is modernizing and is becoming more of a business organization internally, I think having the best professionals with that knowledge is important.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry. Councillor Thompson, questions?
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, to the Auditor General, and thank you for an excellent report. I wanted to understand the additional issue around the management of the TPA. You've mentioned the Vice President specifically in her role, in her capacity. Who else from the TPA were involved? The TPA has obviously a CEO or president and so on. What was that individual's role in this particular process? Did he have a role, and what role did he play in this, the outcome?
I would, through you, Madam Speaker, I would say it would be both individuals. I would say that the VP was a little more involved with the sign consultant directly, but both were copied on all the emails, and the president was more reaching out to the lobbyist and involved with the negotiations and meeting with the lobbyist to try to further and acquire the land.
So in your investigations, and I realize you talked about the valuation and the delta and so on and the variance in terms of numbers, did you discern what was the ultimate goal and objective as to why this effort to pay a price? And I realize that the vendor wanted a specific price, but even though the vendor wanted a specific price, if that price wasn't fair market value, then obviously that's an issue. But did you determine what would have been, or what was the specific rationale for the TPA to acquire the land and the utilization for the lands as such?
Thank you. Through you, Madam Speaker. There was obviously a keen focus on simply acquiring the land. I couldn't see that there were other benefits beyond that. It was simply to acquire the land, and they were well underway with, well, they're trying to get some due diligence done to get the flagpole built, and the focus was for Canada 150 to try to get the flagpole underway as a feature. But there was definitely a keen focus to get the property.
And can you?
And they were directed by council to get the property at fair market value. So, in fairness.
Right. And so, can you help me to understand a little bit about the ownership? So, the ownership of the land, if it was acquired, would have been to the TPA. Is that correct?
Correct.
And then the flagpole, would that have been leased to the Emery, the land portion for the flagpole? Would that have been leased to the Emery Village, or how would that particular transactional sort of relationship work?
Through you, Madam Speaker, it appeared that from April of 2016, it looked like the lobbyist was reporting out that TPA was going to be paying for the flagpole, which would have been at least $5 million, maybe up to 10, but at least $5 million.
That's on top of the price of the acquisition?
The flagpole. And TPA president said at that point in time he was working on a deal to get an agreement in place to have the EVBIA pay back the $5 million for the flagpole.
I see. Thank you. Thank you, Speaker.
Thank you. Councillor Fletcher, ready? Okay.
Yes. I've just been looking at the actual original motion for the Finch West LRT, and I just want to clarify that overall there have been a negotiation with Metrolinx for public realm fund in the amount of $150 million. Is that the...
That's correct for all the public realm improvements related to the Metrolinx projects, public realm.
All Metrolinx.
Yep.
So that would be Finch, Shepherd, Eglinton, the three projects.
That's correct.
And that I also want to clarify around the flagpole, because I've heard two different things. One, that the flagpole, it was always expected that the Emery Village BIA would pay for the flagpole. It's their project. Is that right or wrong, Mr. Williams?
I haven't talked to them in the last year or two, but prior to that, that was the case.
So I'll ask the Auditor General, is it your understanding that Emery Village BIA was expecting that the flagpole would also be covered under these public realm improvements?
Through you, Madam Speaker, what I know is that the TPA was thought to be paying for it. The lobbyists reported out that the TPA would pay for it, and that the Emery Village BIA would repay it through private financing or private fundraising, Section 37 and 42 funds from developments within the EVBIA, and government and services in kind. That's what was reported by the lobbyist at their June 2016 meeting.
That there was nothing in writing or any types of agreements that
was
had been
not
established for that. So just in terms of, that's over now with the land value at 12 million and then the flagpole at 5, we're now at 17. Was there any other project of any kind along the public realm projects, along any of the corridors that would be this size and with that type of investment, $12 to $17 million?
Madam Speaker, I think some of the bikeway improvements that we would have on both Finch and on improvements on Eglinton would be collectively, but I don't think there's a single kind of site-specific project.
Well, there's no site like this one. That's 4.6 acres with 70 parking spots. Is it near a station? Is it near a stop or a major station on the LRT route?
Yes, Madam Speaker.
Okay. So I just wanted to look at this, the lobbyist giving advice to the TPA. That could you run that by me again? They were being paid by Emery Village, BIA, and they were giving advice to Toronto Parking Authority in September and October, Madam Auditor General?
Yes, through you, Madam Speaker. We had billing from the lobbyist to the EVBIA to prep TPA for media questions. And I asked the lobbyist, why are you billing EVBIA for prepping TPA? And he said, I had the president and the VP asking me, how would you position this before the board? So I let them know how I would position it, and I billed for it. Now, I think that...
Okay, so the president of the of TPA and the VP asking the lobbyist how to position that item before the board after you started your investigation?
Through you, Madam Speaker, no, this would have been the historical billing that occurred the April 1st, 2016 invoice, and I didn't come on the scene until September.
I see.
So this was the ongoing, he was billing for some of the interactions with the vendor, with TPA, with prepping TPA for media.
I'm just interested in what the Emery Village BIA was paying for as far as paying the lobbyist. To speak to the Toronto Parking Authority? Just the once?
No, several times. I have the invoices with me, but yes.
Are we able to see those? Are they public documents or not, Speaker?
Yeah.
Are they public? Just city manager, are they
I don't
public?
know. Are they public?
To the city manager, are they public?
My time is...
The invoices, are they public or in camera?
Through you, Madam Chair, generally we will release invoices if requested or if FOI'd, depending on the nature of the invoice, but generally they can be made public.
My point. I can have a
Yes.
look at them.
Okay.
So,
Okay, so Councillor Fletcher, okay, thank you. Well, we are going in camera. Councillor Holliday?
Thank you, Speaker. through you to the auditor. Committee recommendation number 5 suggests that council appoint the city clerk as the secretary for the TPA board. And I wondered, so this report dealt with a transaction and is generally based on things happening at the staff level, but could you, auditor, elaborate a little bit more on how the activity around the board relates to this process, and perhaps what concerns you saw with how the board is functioning that would lead to a recommendation that the city clerk now become involved with the function of this board?
Thank you. Through you, Madam Speaker, a shout out actually to the City Clerk's office. They do support many boards. With my audit committee, they have provided exceptional advice, and I would say try to keep the committees on the side of the angels as the public expects transparency and also to make sure things are functioning well. The city clerk is well steeped and well versed in procedural matters and in making sure that the public's best interests are at heart around transparency around the meetings. What I noticed in the meeting was, in the meetings that I attended, although I didn't do a full review of the board, in the meetings that I attended, there was ongoing disagreements around procedural matters. For example, a simple thing like reviewing the appraisals that came in. A separate meeting was scheduled outside the regular meeting. It wasn't on an agenda item. And so what happened was I advised the president that that would have been a meeting that would not be allowed under the rules and the legislation. And that would have been something that the city clerk's office would have been helpful with. So I think for the committee to focus on the substantive matters, they need to have a strong support around procedural matters. My history and experience based in the cities, the city clerk's office can do that and does it for Exhibition Place and many other committees and boards around the city. And I thought in this case, on everything I've seen, they would have been the best choice.
The report goes on to talk about the board, and it talks about a situation where a member dissented. And I guess that's Councillor Filion, if I've read this correctly. Could you elaborate a little bit on what happened when Councillor Filion dissented with the idea of purchasing this land at the price that was looked at that point in time, I think the $12 million?
Excuse me, through you, Madam Speaker, could you be more clear on your question?
Did the board's bylaws support Councillor Filion dissenting from this? Was Councillor Filion met with resistance by the board or members of the board? I think the report speaks a little bit about it. Essentially, I'll go further to say that perhaps he was acting in a capacity of whistleblower, or maybe did the councillor as a board member have a fiduciary duty to challenge things when he wasn't happy with what he saw, or had concerns or questions, or was missing information?
So it's, I believe the challenge, through you, Madam Speaker, the challenge is you have competing issues here. You have when you're on a board, your first loyalty is to that board. And also you are acting as a councillor in another capacity. So it became challenging, and I have recommended having training to support the council and the boards in relation to those when you have a conflict in relation to that. When he dissented, I felt that because of procedural matters, because he was trying to get information, it seemed like the board was in one space and he was in another space. And I felt that this deal would have gone through had he not come to me. He was protecting the public's interest, which I think is a greater interest, and he did the right thing.
Your report talks about arguably Councillor Filion could have come to you after the transaction was approved on September 15th at the price of $12 million. In theory, should the board have met and done that, what would have happened? What would be the position of TPA or the city? Would we then own a property? Would it have been too late?
Thank you. Through Madam Chair, it is not common that we're called in the middle of a transaction, and we have to be very careful when we do that. What would have happened would be we would be looking at a deal that would have been processed. In my view, we would have paid beyond $2.5 million more, but I think the questions that have been risen in this file are beyond the price. There's some questions around independence and that kind of thing. So instead of looking backward, we were trying to just assess the situation. It could have been that Councillor Filion was absolutely wrong. It could have been that we found sufficient support in the file, and in that case, the deal would have proceeded as it would have been intended. That's not what happened here.
Thank you. That was your last question. Councillor Karygiannis.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Through you to staff, I was wondering if I can find out how the report was initiated, who initiated the report, and how this report came to council, or who brought it to us. If I can have some background, I'll greatly be appreciative of that, please.
Which report? That Auditor General is bringing.
Yes, I mean, like, who initiated it? Why was it? I mean, why did we come about this? I'd like to get some background, please.
Through you, Madam Speaker, a complaint came to me through Councillor Filion, and then I conducted an investigation. I had a two-part report. The first report came to Council through the Audit Committee, October 28th of 2016. And this is a second report that came to the board and then to Audit Committee just earlier last week. That's how it came to be.
Thank you.
Councillor DeGiorgio.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm having some difficulty with this particular item simply because TPA was authorized to acquire the land at fair market value. And are people alleging that, in fact, the vendor was asking for a market value lower than what the TPA ended up negotiating? Like, there are two parties. What was the vendor actually asking for? I haven't read the report to see what the vendor was asking for.
Through you, Madam Speaker, the vendor was asking for $12.18 million.
Okay.
And
but the fair market value that, let's say, the city evaluated was in the neighborhood of 9.5.
Yes.
Correct. Okay. So when there is a delta between valuation by both the vendor and the city, why would the city not contemplate going through expropriation to deal with that delta?
Through you, Madam Speaker, that was an option. Another option would have been to come back to City Council and simply ask, explain the situation and the importance of the gateway or the flagpole, and ask for approval at that current rate. Two options.
Is expropriation an option now? I don't know, is it?
I don't know, Councillor, who can answer that question. I don't know.
Nor do I.
Well.
So, okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Unless we have real estate here willing to answer.
Well, real estate is here.
Yeah, maybe he's willing to answer. I think I see him running up to the microphone.
Expropriation of the property is still possible, yes.
Thank you.
Councillor Kelly.
All right, thank you, Speaker. A lot of the questions that I had have been asked and answered, but I want to preface my questions for thanking the Auditor General for all the work that was done on this file. But the remaining questions that I have are these. Now, there are two issues in two categories of exploration. One is the value of the evaluation of the property, and the other is that furball of relationships that you described. If we take that furball and put it aside, hairball, I knew that. I was just testing to see if you did. That's a lame response. I apologize. But I think that will be explored in camera. But to look at the issue of fair market value, spent some time in real estate. It was long enough ago that it resides in a cloudy area of my memory. But I remember that there were a number of ways of determining value. Now, fair market value is one of them. Appraised value is another. And it would appear that you're merging those two, that the appraised value would be below what was paid for that land. But as we all know, land value is not a static commodity, especially in a market like Toronto and the GTA, where values are escalating dramatically. So trying to determine fair market value using the appraised value seems to be in conflict with each other. Would you agree?
Not quite. Let me explain. Through you, Madam Speaker, we have two values here. We have the negotiated price, and then they were asked to get fair market value. So 3 real estate appraisers independently valued fair market value under the appraisal standards for the land to be between $7.5 and $8 million over 1 year. So it can fluctuate, but over 1 year, the value of the land itself was worth between $7.5 and $8 million based on 3 real estate appraisals conducted, and the scope was to determine the fair market value, and the fair market value was that. The negotiated price was what the vendor wanted, and then whether TPA was willing to pay for that negotiated price.
But I've been involved in transactions or have seen transactions where the vendor has simply said, this is what I want, take it or leave it. And if you exclude all the goofiness that you've outlined today with respect to the explanations that you were given by staff, if it had simply come down to this is the price I want, take it or leave it, wouldn't you agree that that would have established a new threshold for market value?
Through you, Madam Speaker, it was not it was the direction of City Council to get a fair market value. The professionals said that was not fair market value, and they had 2 options. They could expropriate, or they could have come back and said to Council, we have support from real estate appraisers, independent, to be this amount. Right. Would you be willing to pay more? And then at that point in time, if somebody paid, that would be.
So what you have here is a potential conflict between appraised value and market value. At least that's what I would perceive. The deal has been stopped. Are there any, could the TPA be liable for damages?
Through you, Madam Speaker, they received the deposit back on the deal.
I'm sorry?
They received their deposit back on the deal. They made a deposit, and then when the deal was stopped, they received their deposit back. So you'll have to speak to City Legal on that question.
It was reimbursed.
So in essence, the deal, both sides have agreed that the deal is dead. Is that correct?
That was your last question.
At this point in time, the deal is dead.
Thank you. Councillor Palacio.
Thank you, Speaker. Through you to the Auditor General. Would you agree that that the City of Toronto, as the shareholder, has an excellent board? I'm referring to the Toronto Parking Authority. Would you agree?
Could you repeat the question? Would I agree?
Would you agree that the members of the the TPA are excellent members?
I don't. Overall. As part of my review, I just take the board as I find. As I take City Council, I don't do an internal evaluation of every person.
Well, my question to you is: do you have confidence on the board, on the TPA board, as we move forward, or not? Do you have confidence on them?
Through you, Madam Speaker, I have, as you saw from my last slide, I have concern that the questions that were being raised were deemed to be obstructionist in the process. I don't have the, you'll have it on the last slide, but from the chair, I did have a concern with that, and I did raise that in my report.
Yeah, some of the recommendations, just to provide a bit more information, the board may have to make a determination in terms of future actions. Now, I would like to know if you have confidence on the board or not, or you have lost that confidence, and that's the advice that you're giving to.
Councillor Palacio, she's answered the question.
Can you please?
Yeah, I don't think she can determine that.
Did you find any wrongdoing from the CEO or the VP?
I think we'll go Councillor Palacio in camera.
I'm going to follow up on the question of Councilor Moliri, and that's with regards to the West Finch LRT. And the question that I would like to hear is in terms of how Metrolinx and the TPA were supposed to create and move forward with the public realm enhancements. And my question, I believe, is to the real estate. Mr. Casali, I don't know if he's here at the moment, or the deputy city manager.
Yeah, he's here.
And the question is in terms of, there was a report that was public in nature and making those recommendations. And I would like to, Mr. Casale, so the question is a follow-up to Councilor Mamoliri's question in terms of the recommendations made by Metrolinx and the TPA in terms of creating additional and enhancements to the public realm. And who wrote that report? Do you have that information?
So I'll answer that question. So through you, I believe the report that you're referring to is EX 13-9 from March 2016. Real estate was not involved in that. That report came from the Deputy City Manager of Cluster
EX
B.
13?
13.9.
Thank you. So within that report, there were recommendations where Metrolinx and the TPA were supposed to work in collaboration to create that public enhancement within that square.
So, Madam Speaker, the report recommended that we advise Metrolinx of certain mandatory public realm initiatives and some discretionary public realm initiatives that they would be crafting in their RFP to secure bid responses in the bidders in terms of things that they could do to achieve both mandatory and discretionary items.
Was the BIA part of that joint venture at whatever point?
So, Madam Speaker, in the preparation of the report, the BIA, Transportation Division, and others were involved and asked for a list of both mandatory and discretionary items that could be included in the RFP for Metrolinx. And yes, the Emery Village BIA did submit a number of things, including gateways, bike paths, and this property at Arrow Road.
Is there a value to it? Do we have the figures that were allocated to each one?
Madam Speaker, no, there was only their direction from City Council for the TPA to acquire at fair market value this property.
Thank you. Councillor Cressy.
Thank you, Speaker. I have a few questions for the Auditor General. You described, starting on page 34 of your report, missing documentation and some of the difficulty you had in obtaining information. Could you tell me, or Council, when did you first ask for documentation, including the appraisals?
Thank you. Through you, Madam Speaker, I asked for them in the very first meeting.
Which was when again?
September 2nd.
September 2nd. And what were you told?
I was told that there was a small file from the EVBIA, but in relation to what TPA had done, there was no information. I asked for the calculations, and I was informed by the VP that it was on the back of an envelope. I asked for the envelope, and they said didn't have the envelope anymore. So that's what I left the meeting with.
So when did you eventually get the information you had requested, including the appraisals?
After several attempts at trying to get the information, by trying to piece together, by reading the documents that there would have been information or there should have been information, I took my own measures to go in and to get some emails and documents myself in order to be able to piece together. And that's how I determined that there was a second valuation for a second sign and that there's a lot of documentation missing. So then I informed the board right away, and then at that point in time, the board instructed that all documents be provided to me, but there were still calculations and documents missing that were deleted.
So let me build on that. So you talk about the level of time and the difficulty in obtaining information that was available, but some information was missing. So you just mentioned, and in your presentation, you mentioned deleted emails. Is there a deleted email?
Correct.
And what's the importance of the information in that deleted email?
So that would have been the email where the calculations were performed for the second potential sign by the VP and provided over, the attached spreadsheet was provided over to the sign consultant. And the reason for that value, the importance of it is that you can go in to see who's preparing these documents from the electronic version. And so even though we never did receive that.
So does the Toronto Parking Authority have the right to withhold information from you?
It does not, and they did say they didn't understand my request. That's why I put up on the board, on the screen, the detail with which my request was made. Any emails, documents, anything related to this, even to the point of asking for any appraisals and.
So, but to be very clear, the Toronto Parking Authority does not have the right to withhold this information from you?
Correct.
Okay. Does it concern you that an agency of the city was seemingly unwilling to provide you, and in turn this city, with information you requested?
So I would say, is looking at the totality of the situation, so the answer is yes, but when I first started, it's not. Usually it doesn't happen to this degree, but people can be nervous when an auditor shows up. And so I try to give people the benefit of the doubt all the way through the process if they were nervous. So then when we went back the second time, once the board directed it, the email that was deleted was not a part of that discussion. So all the way through, and when I got to the very end, where I was then informed at the very end that the VP wasn't in the room, it was a lobbyist who called, it was a lobbyist who was in the room. That should have been in the first meeting, and we had asked extensively. So over the totality, it does raise a concern for me, yes.
Okay. You described this hairball. Who are the parties that would be involved in this web? Could you just identify the different parties that are at play here? You described a sign consultant. You described a lobbyist.
EVBIA.
Okay.
And Toronto Parking Authority. So the members of the board for
members
the EVBO,
of the board,
yes.
Members of council?
Yes,
okay.
Because, I mean, we do have a member of a board on the EVBIA and also on the TPA board, and that's not wrong or unusual, but it just creates a lot of cloud, therefore the need for transparency is absolutely paramount.
So, given what we've heard today, given the concerns you've raised, given the need for transparency, is there utility in the city pursuing further investigation?
Yes.
Yes. Thank you.
Councillor Crisanti.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And to the Auditor General, you referred to two numbers earlier. One was the asking price of this property, and one was an appraised value. Could you please reiterate what those numbers were?
Asking price was...
Of the property.
Of the property. The price that was finally negotiated was $12.18 million.
Asking 12.18, okay.
And the valuation was 9.55. Now, only about 8 million, 7.75 or 8 million of that is land. There's also a sign, a digital sign that's valued at about 1.55 to 2.
Okay. Yeah, I'll get back to the sign in a moment. But what were the dates of these of this asking price as of what date and the date of the appraisal?
So
you
I'll
referenced?
just go through the chronology. The first appraisal, draft appraisal, was done by TPA in September 2015, and it was, or the end of August 2015, and it was 7.75. The price of $12 million was negotiated, plus a development agreement in the negotiation, the development of the flagpole. That was in January. In May, the development agreement came out of the deal, and they added another 100,000. And in August, around another 80,000 was added because the vendor had a tax problem, and so the VP added $80,000 to the price. That was above what the board had approved.
Okay. And was there another valuation done by the landlord? Your report makes reference to that.
The information provided to me by the VP, she said that she had seen a valuation by a consultant for 17 million that the landlord had.
Right.
But the issue was that the comparables were not apples to apples, apparently. And so her valuation was 7.75 million, and ours was close to that. So
Have you seen the $17 million valuation?
so nobody was able to produce that. We asked several times if she actually had a copy. She did not. So nobody had ever been able to obtain that.
All right, I think that's important to see if that becomes available. So how does the sign factor in on this? And who owns the sign, by the way? Who owns the sign on the property?
So the land is owned by CAPTA, K-A-T-P-A, and CAPTA, a principal is DeLuca, but DeLuca owns the sign. DeLuca.
So DeLuca, the property owner, owns the sign on that property?
No, the land is owned by CATPA Holdings, and CATPA, the principal who acts for CATPA, the person who helps to make the decisions, is DeLuca, and the sign, I understand, is owned by DeLuca.
And the sign is installed on that property and is being, are they paying rent to the property owner for that sign?
Yes, the rent is it's about 130,000. So the net present value of the rent was about, from here to the end of the lease, about 1.55 million.
Okay. So if there is an offer to purchase a property, why would that not be exclusive or separate from any sign valuation? In other words, there should have been two very separate deals.
Through you, Madam Speaker, that would have been something that probably could have been made more clear to the board. But it's not uncommon when you purchase property that there are, they call them contributory assets on the property that have a value. So that's a question for TPA. Okay. But it's not uncommon to happen.
Do you happen to know what, I'm running out of time, what the value of that property currently is today? In 2000?
So my valuation was completed in October. I don't have the valuation today, but the people who did the valuation both for TPA and for me factored in the LRT, factored in zoning, factored in all those things when they did the valuation back in October.
October of 2016?
Correct.
And what was that number?
My valuation was 7.75, and TPA's valuation was 8 million.
Okay, that was your last question.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Campbell?
Thank you. Through you, Madam Speaker. The annual, you said that the annual revenue from the sign was $130,000. What's the lease duration? You must have that to get the...
I'm sorry, go ahead. Could you repeat the question, please?
So you said that the annual revenue from the sign was $130,000. What is the duration of the lease?
So there is about 10 years left. I'm trying to recall, it's in my earlier report. I think there's about 10 years left.
So what does that mean? Because if you just, I'm a little confused by the ownership, because Kapka Holdings owns the land, DeLuca owns the sign. If they were to purchase, were they purchasing the lease? They were to purchase the lease for 10 years. What would what is there to prohibit that lease or that sign going beyond 10 years?
Through you, Madam Speaker, your question is correct. The evaluator, we factored in those opportunities. We actually called a market player, and he confirmed even if you went out for a 30-year lease, the deal is only worth for the sign about $2 million max, but you have to discount that you have to get potential for a permit. You have to take into account that you have to change the lighting on it. Right. So both TPA and I called market players on top of the independent valuations, and so max would be $2 million, and then you have to take out those costs, and our valuation come up to 1.55. So it's very close.
So when the vendor gave his price of $12 million, that's my final, that's my price. Did that include the sign calculation?
Yes.
It did include the sign calculation. Okay. Would this deal have closed without your intervention?
Yes. Through you, Madam Speaker, yes.
You think, in your view, it would have?
Absolutely.
Depending on further questions from members of the board, I suppose. Okay. Was the...
So through you, Madam Speaker, may I comment on that?
Yeah.
The issue was that the information wasn't getting to the board.
Right.
So the reason I say that this would have closed is because the detailed involvement of the VP, the information wasn't coming to the board. Things were not as transparent like the valuations.
Was that second sign included in the valuation, the final valuation, or had they taken that out at that point?
When I arrived, it was taken out.
They'd taken that out.
And then they went to a different approach.
What's the significance of the sign consultant? I don't quite get that connection, because I mean, it's basic. It says in your report it's basic math. What was the significance of the? So did TPA retain the sign consultant, or was he doing this as a favor, or what was that connection?
So the sign through you, Madam Speaker, the sign consultant was doing this as a service to his client to come up with.
His client was who?
TPA. TPA was his client. Right. The EVBIA at one point was his client. Right. The lobbyist also worked for the sign consultant. And so normally you look at the income stream, but he was being asked to maximize any potential value on that property, and his view was there was a possibility at one point to get more money for a sign that didn't.
But in terms of making a determination on the value the TPA was prepared to pay, his role wasn't that instrumental in coming to the final valuation. That's what I got yes. Because you seem to yes. say that the VP was heavily involved in the calculation.
So based on his calculations, he was providing the valuation that was included on the real estate appraisal, the land appraisal. His valuation was attached to the back. A cover letter was put on the top to say 8 million plus 4 million equals 12 million, and the cover letter was done by the VP. So his valuation was critical to 1/3 of the value of the property.
Oh, okay. All right.
That was it. It's only when I come in and demonstrated that there's no more than 2 million here, 1.55 right. to 2, that they said, well, we would have gotten somebody else.
His role was instrumental in providing credence to that amount, absolutely. Not necessarily arriving at that amount.
Correct.
Right. Okay.
So the negotiated price was in place since about January, give or take a little bit.
Okay. Thank you. That's my questions, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Councillor Grimes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I think my question is for Mr. Casali, I believe.
Okay, I'll put your time on hold.
My question is kind of in the same light as Councillor Kelly and I guess Councillor Crisanti, fair market value. So Council directed the TPA to purchase the property, right? So you got somebody saying, I want 17 million, okay, let's bring it down to 12. We're saying it's 9.5. So if the vendor knows that the city's interested in property, would not bring the fair market value, the value up, if he knows that we want that property?
The vendor would have known who he's dealing with, and...
Council directed the TPA to purchase the property.
At fair
right?
market.
So we're saying it's 9.5, 9 million, 12 million, and he knows the city's interest. Does that not bring up the market value? Do we not deal with this all the time in the city? People know government want the property, the price would be higher?
I'll say vendors tend to look at the city having deep pockets, and they try to move us on the purchase price.
So could this not be the case happening here?
It could be.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Fillion.
Thank you. First of all, question about the sign. Was this a sign that staff had recommended? How did the sign get there?
Through you, Madam Speaker, the sign was back in 2009. The EVBIA needed an income stream in order to build the flagpole. So the lobbyist apparently brought together the sign consultant, the vendor to put a sign on the property, and the sign revenue was going to transfer to the EVBIA back in the early days when they're trying to lease the land, they're trying to buy the land. That was going to be the revenue with which they were going to build the flagpole. It was on the vendor's land, but the EVBIA was evident that the EVBIA wanted to buy that land or lease that land, and that was going to be the revenue to help to build the flagpole. So the sign was really between the sign consultant, the vendor, and the lobbyist. That's how it came to be early on, from the information that I could see.
How did it get approved?
In June 2009, the sign consultant represented the vendor before Etobicoke Community Council because they needed a variance and to allow the sign, and that's where it was approved.
Thank you. Just dealing with the appraisal, I think you made this clear, but there were several appraisals and it gets a bit confusing. So there was an appraisal done in 2015 by the Parking Authority. Would that be correct?
Yes, that was a 74-page appraisal, but it was not signed off. It was used for negotiation purposes, but it was still in a draft form. But very significant. Yeah, we paid about $13,000 or $7,500, something like that.
And when I first asked for an appraisal, like a basis for the purchase price, if there was any appraisal, and when you first asked if there was any appraisal, we were both told there wasn't one. Would that be correct?
Correct. And I think one of the explanations are, well, we wouldn't want to give that out because somebody might make a wrong decision about that. They were really waiting, and I think hoping that the land value would go up.
A question of the deputy city manager, and I'm not going to delve into this too far, but would it be accurate to say that the staff of the Toronto Parking Authority was involved in the recommendation, involved in the preparation of the recommendation to itself that it purchase this property?
Yes, Madam Speaker. As we do on any report, we check with the relevant divisions and agencies. In this case, the TPA, we were aware that they were looking at this property. We knew there was complementary things that they would be doing ultimately if they were to acquire this property in terms of public realm and other improvements that would be related to the streetscaping and bike and pedestrian and public realm initiatives. So yes.
And would it have been assumed that there was some kind of business case for purchasing this property?
Madam Speaker, absolutely.
Yeah. But did we ever see a business case for purchasing it?
So the recommendation was for them to acquire at fair market price this property, and there was certain delegations given and authorities to them to undertake those initiatives on their behalf.
I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor DiCiano, you have 2.5 minutes left in your time, so did you want to ask that question?
Yeah, thank you. I received a response offline to my questions, so I'm good with that. Just some more clarity. When council approved the acquisition of this land, That was public, is that correct?
Mic is on.
That is correct.
Was the land actually for sale when council approved the acquisition of the land? Was it on the market?
Through you, Madam Speaker,
Was it publicly listed on the market for sale?
I'm not aware of that. I know that it's been under negotiation, discussed, up for lease, assigned for lease for a long time, but I don't know if it had been listed. I don't think it was listed publicly. I don't think that's where it was, yeah.
Is there anyone here that can answer that question? If that property was on the open market for sale when we went out and authorized TPA to buy the site?
Through you, Madam Speaker, just so that you know, when you authorized it, there had been a draft agreement of purchase and sale in place for 3 months with the $12 million price and a development agreement in draft by March. So it was already in place. The actual negotiation, the decision on the price was already in place. But if you're asking, was it on the open market at the time?
Yeah, and the reason I asked that, and I'm not sure who I'm going to ask here, but did council give the TPA an impossible mandate to go and buy something at fair market value when the site wasn't actually on the open market? Because if something's not on the open market, why would anyone in their right mind want fair market value and not more for their property? So was there an instruction that was impossible to achieve by TPA on this?
Through you, Madam Speaker, the agreement was negotiated in January at $12 million. That was already set. So to say to go at a fair market value, I would presume the TPA would be getting at a fair market value anyway. That's what they would have been trying to do anyway. Or they would have a business case to have supported the $12 million acquisition. So it may not have been possible for them to get it at fair market value, but the reality was they were already down the road with a negotiated purchase and sale agreement in place.
So who authorized? Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Cressy, you want to make an announcement?
Thank you, Speaker. To change the tone in the room slightly here, I have a 30-second announcement. I'd like to introduce 2 people in the room, and I'd ask them to rise. It's Peter Chow and Wayne Hunnigan, if you both want to stand up. Many of you will know Cafe on the Square as the place where, of course, we get our coffee and food, and Wayne is the general manager there. In this case, this is about more than food and beverage. It's about building community, because Peter Chow, standing there behind us, is one of the top students in George Brown College's augmented education class. And he is an assistant cook learning culinary skills right here in Cafe on the Square. This is a George Brown College program to support people with mental health and addiction histories and to help address barriers to employment. So Peter is here helping prepare our food and beverage, and Wayne, who we all thank every day as he keeps us caffeinated, is helping to build our city into a better place. Please join me in giving them a round of applause.
Thank you. Councillor Wong Tam.
Much, Madam Speaker, and I do appreciate that slight change of topic, but putting our Auditor General back on the hot seat. With respect to the property of interest, if it was not publicly listed on the MLS system or some type of public listing program, it does not mean that it was not held under some type of exclusive contract with a particular brokerage or even a licensing agent. Is that not correct? That you can actually have a combination of the two or one?
Madam Speaker, I don't have any more information other than they were working on a draft agreement of purchase and sale that ended up being signed in August, but that's all that I had. In January, they had the price that was determined, and they were working through that, so I can't add more, but maybe the city staff can add more information.
In terms of coming to an agreement on market value, all I would say is if the property was not listed, we obviously would have more difficulty coming to negotiated agreement, but the city would always have the opportunity to expropriate if it wished. And so we do this numerous times a year when dealing with property owners that do not have their property listed for sale.
That's right. And so therefore, even if it's not listed either on an open MLS system or if it was held under an exclusive brokerage contract, any buyer can still approach any particular property owner and submit an offer to purchase.
Yes.
Nothing stops that from happening.
Yes, that's true.
Okay. And with respect to the fair market value, under the assessment, under the assessments, how often is it that we reach into the future and put forward some hypotheticals to leverage a higher price as a buyer?
What would happen is an appraisal would look at highest and best use. And so what would the marketplace do with respect to a willing buyer, willing seller? The appraiser would look at the potential for the property, if there's planning opportunity to increase density, to change the use, that kind of thing. And then he would give his opinion, he or she would give their opinion of what they think the highest and best use is, and then calculate what the actual value is for that use.
In the meeting of the mind of the buyer and the seller, that would happen generally without any duress. Under normal current situations, under normal conditions.
That's what we refer to as willing buyer, willing seller, yes.
Right. And in this case, was there a buyer or a seller that was under duress?
I don't recall ever competing against any other purchasers at the time when city staff were involved.
So in your time at City Hall and your time in service to the corporation, you've never been part of a transaction where there has been an agency purchasing under duress, or a seller selling under duress. Is that my understanding? Is that what you were trying to say?
Whenever the city expropriates, I consider that the seller selling under duress.
But they're still obtaining fair market value.
We're required under law to determine what market value is. We're not there to, as a city, we're not there to take a property from someone without all their rights being protected.
Even if the city was to initiate expropriation and not carry it through to completion, the act of initiating expropriation could motivate a seller.
It could, yes.
Because we've seen that before.
Yes, we have.
And in this case, this could have been one way. I think that perhaps the TPA could have approached the purchase of this land. Would that have been a strategy that you would have put forth if they sought your advice?
It would have been an option, but I would believe that Parking Authority would first come to Real Estate Services to have that discussion, and then we may get involved with the vendor, because Real Estate Services takes care of all the expropriations across the city, and so that expertise is very specialized, so we would have come into play at that point.
Is there a capital gains exemption to the seller if a property was expropriated?
There's a benefit to the owner, or the seller, sorry, in that capital gains are deferred for, I believe it is 2 years, so that they can reinvest their capital gains without having to pay the tax.
That was your last question. Councillor Carroll?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. My questions are of a real estate nature as well. Following on Councillor Wong-Tam, but really following on Councillor DiCiano's line of questioning, I want to make sure that we're not unduly focused on what is really normal process, and we get on to the things that don't look like normal process. In normal process, an agency, board, or commission, if they're required to come to us for authorization, it's not unusual that they would have already begun the preparation of a transaction, that they would have already done some of the work they've done before they're coming to the council for authorization to purchase a property.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And in normal process, council always, if I'm not mistaken, always our direction is to purchase a property for fair market value. We would never give the direction, please pay fair market value or anything. We just want the property. That's never council's direction, is it?
It's to buy property at fair market value.
We've never directed anybody to buy a property for anything but.
No, you have not.
Thank you. So the normal process here would be, no matter what, if they came and we saw an in-camera report that said we're looking at this price, our direction that says purchase it at fair market value would still require the board to take a second look, or staff members, whomever, to make sure that now they are going ahead with the transaction, now that they have the authorization. The last step would be that they go back and make sure that they are indeed looking at an offer that is indeed the fair market value that council directed. That's the process in any transaction, is it not?
Yes, if they're putting something in front of council, it would normally be market value, and if it's not, then there would be an explanation as to why it wouldn't be market value. And that conversation then occurs, and council gives us direction as to what they want us to do in the matter.
Right, so all they would have had to do was disclose why it was a bit beyond. So if it goes back and council's given a direction, a board member saying, can we please be assured this is a fair market value, and if they have reason to believe it's not inappropriate to ask the question, why is it not?
I think it's fair to always ask that question.
Thank you. Those are my questions, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Councillor Perruzza.
I just wanted to get a sense of how one would arrive at fair market value for this property. I'm trying to visualize it. I guess it's the site along Finch, between on the south side of Finch, between Arrow Road and the highway on-ramp, correct? The 400 on-ramp?
Yes.
It's sort of between the road and the church. I always thought it was part of the church property, but it's under a different ownership?
Yes, I believe so.
So it's kind of like a long sausage, sort of long strip of land, but with very sort of shallow depth, right?
It's an irregular shape.
Yeah. So and what would be the zoning on those lands now?
I believe that it's going a ways back, but I believe one part of the lands is zoned employment and the other part is commercial, I believe. I could be wrong. The auditor may know.
Yeah, part of the land was zoned institutional for sure. So, because there's a church, a prayer palace right next to it, so it was zoned institutional. But I'd have to have a look.
I stand corrected.
So you're saying institutional. So it's a vacant parcel of land. So how would, I guess the question that I'm driving towards is, how does one establish what fair market value for those lands would be, and how would one establish what their highest and best use may or may not be? Like what would you use? What would be the sort of the measuring stick for that?
So every property is different, but what the appraiser would do, he would look at what's happening in the area, what are the possibilities for the site overall, and if he or she does see that there's opportunity that's not reflective in the zoning or the official plan, they then look at what are the possibilities of getting that zoning changed.
I guess what I'm driving at, as somebody who's sort of seen this property a number of times, is to arrive at what we would call fair market value for those particular lands. One would have to look at that and say, well, I mean, you got a church next door. What if it was a church? What would somebody pay for these lands to build another church? I guess what I'm trying to understand is we're using some very, very specific numbers here today, but the reality is that the range could be very, very large on a parcel of land like that, no? Depending on what the people looking at it, the particular appraisers, sort of saw as a functional use for that site in terms of its location and how to access it and all those things, right?
Well, it depends on the terms of reference that the appraiser's been guided to use. Normally at the city, we would say appraise the property at highest and best use. So that leaves it open for the appraiser to use his professional judgment to come up with a value for the property. And within that appraisal, he then has supporting documentation that shows comparable properties around the city, and he will adjust up or down depending on how those comparables relate to this property, i.e., are they better than this property, or there's some detriment to them, and therefore he reduces the value of those.
So in this particular case, it would just be sort of straight out comparisons with similar properties, with similar rights on those lands, with similar potential across the city. That's what you're saying. No other method.
There are other methods, and I believe that the appraiser looks through to see which method would be appropriate. What I'm used to is a lot of times, if it's an income-generating property, the appraiser will use both the income approach and he'll use the direct comparable approach to
But on a vacant parcel of land like this, and with only a sign being located, how would you use the income approach to determine its value?
Well, you would look at the uses that are there now that are paying a rent.
But there aren't any uses. It's vacant, isn't it?
I don't believe it's completely vacant, no.
Through you, Madam Speaker. The property is vacant except for a sign.
Right, just
what
the sign, yeah.
Mr. Casale has described as the highest and best use, excluding encumbrances, 3 different appraisal firms did use that valuation approach, and they came to within $500,000 3 times over the year.
Okay, that was your last question. Mayor Tory.
Well, Madam Speaker, if the list is exhausted, I have a motion that Council recess its public session to meet as Committee of the Whole in closed session to consider Audit Committee Item 9.12, actions arising from the Auditor General's report regarding land acquisition at Finch Avenue West and Arrow Road by Toronto Parking Authority, Part 2. The reason for the confidential information is security of the property belonging to the city or one of its agencies, personal matters about identifiable persons, and or advice or communications that are subject to solicitor-client privilege.
Okay, thank you. All in favor? Carried. Okay, so if I can ask members of the public and media, if you could please vacate the council chambers, we will be going in camera. We'll have a 5-minute recess. right? So we have not completed the closed session consideration of AU 9.12 Auditor General's observation. Narrow Road by the Toronto Parking Authority, Part 2. I will ask for a motion to meet in a further closed session later in the meeting if it's necessary. The Auditor General just wants to make one correction, 30 seconds. Okay, hold on, your mic is not on. Okay.
Two monuments that the lobbyist was involved with. The first one was this one related to this project, was the flagpole, and that was, the billings on that have been about $1 million. The second one, I misquoted the price. It was not 500, it was actually 89,000 for a second monument due to another project. I just want to make that clear on the record. I just quoted the wrong total.
Okay, thank you. Recess to 2 o'clock.